Hello students, so this is the first time I'm doing this and we're going to try it out and see how it works, but it's kind of a cool way to review the notes from each day if we did take notes and give you guys a chance to review if you weren't here as well. It helps you catch up a little bit. So I'm going to go about 5 minutes here, just go quickly over what we talked about each day, and that way you have a better understanding instead of having to kind of figure it out on yourself. So today our learning target was I can define and explain economic terms and provide examples of each term. So let's get started. So we started off by defining what is economics, and we went to this YouTube video here, and when you click on the link, it'll take you to a crash course world history kind of format, but it's more economics. So these two are the economic people, kind of a new thing that started. So watch that if you missed class that day. If you need to review, it's a really good review too to go ahead and watch that video. So make sure you do that. Monopoly was our first term, so obviously first thing we think about monopoly is the game, but really monopoly is when a business or person has possession or control over one good or commodity and a service too. So that is something that really is very rare to see. Usually we see it with federal government stuff like DMV. There's no other place you can get your license. You have to go to the DMV. So that could be considered a monopoly in real life. But also, we always tend to think of big corporations as monopolies. Well, they're always competing with someone. Walmart has to compete with grocery stores. They even have to compete with toy companies. They're more of a supplier, okay, and then they are working with those toy companies and everybody to sell their products through Walmart. So Walmart's pretty big, but they're not a monopoly because they have to compete with places like Target as well. So always think of that as more of a corporation, not a monopoly. Gross domestic product was the next term, and gross domestic product is the total number of goods and services provided in a country during 1 year, and that's all new stuff. So you can't go to a garage sale and buy a CD, and that doesn't go towards GDP. But if you go to Best Buy, for example, and get a new Apple laptop computer, then that would go to our GDP because that's something new that had been bought in that year. Obviously, U.S. is the highest GDP, and then China's in that second place. Now, this is to me, a better representation of how well an economy is doing is looking at GDP per capita, which is per person. And all it is you take the GDP of a country and divide it by the population of that country. Okay? And when you do that, you get GDP per capita. And this is just a chart, infographic map of what GDP per capita around the world looks like. So the countries that are more black have a higher GDP per capita. Countries that are yellow or tan are very low. So as you can see, Africa struggles there. You can see parts of Southern Asia that struggle. United States does well, Canada does well, Europe for the most part does well. Middle East has a couple countries like Saudi Arabia that do well, and they have countries that aren't so good like Yemen. So those are just things that you have to kind of think about, and especially when we talk about future units and we look at the economies of a place. So if we look at the top 10 GDP per capita around the world, Luxembourg, which is a tiny country in Europe, is first. And this is how much, if you took the GDP of Luxembourg divided by their population, it would equal somewhere around almost $106,000 a year. So that's pretty good GDP per capita. And then the U.S. there is eighth in GDP per capita. This is more of a standard of living, what you guys can tell. So usually the higher number of your GDP per capita, the better the country is as far as to live in. Capitalism. You can watch these videos. We just watched one in class, really. Some classes got to it, some didn't. Just depends on the class, really. But if you watch it, it gives you 4 terms you got to define, really. Supply and demand, freedom, choice, and incentive. Supply and demand is how we set prices in capitalism. Freedom is your freedom to do whatever you want as long as you are in the rules. That you can start any business you want. You can get any job you want as long as you qualify and all that good stuff. And then choice, obviously, is what you choose to do with that income that you get. And no one can tell you how to spend your money. You spend your money the way you want to. And then finally, incentive is the motivational things that want us to get out there, make more money, or possibly do better. Because incentives, even in the classroom, is like, okay, maybe an incentive is that if I get an A on this project, then I'm going to get a pizza party. Something like that. So incentives are things that motivate us to do better. Resources Okay, we talked about renewable, non-renewable. Renewable, for example, would be timber and water, where non-renewable would be most of your fossil fuels, so oil, coal, all that stuff. U.S. #1 natural resource actually is coal, and then Canada is oil, which I thought was very interesting because they have the second largest reserve. Scarcity is really easy to understand. Scarcity means there's just not a lot of that thing. So diamonds could be scarce. And it depends also on where you're at. So like if I'm in the desert, water's scarce, and food's scarce, and shade is scarce. I mean, there's a lot of things scarce in the desert. That's why it's hard to live there. So you can watch that video. Again, I think I only got to one class that actually got to watch this. But it talks about scarcity. It goes in more depth with it. And really, it's just the basic economic problem that we all face today, which is that we have unlimited wants and resources are limited, so we have to make choices based on that. Okay, so again, economics is all about decision making, you guys. It's not about just money. Okay, it's about the decisions we make with that and our limited resources based on our unlimited wants. So industrial versus agricultural, real easy. Industrial is more business sect, and agriculture is more farming sect. So that is just things you need to understand when we talk about future countries. Is it more industrial? Is it more agricultural? Usually your developing countries are more agricultural, and your developed countries are more industrial. Okay. And last thing here is the literacy rate. And we got to some of this with some classes, and some of this we had to fly through. So I'll go over with you real quick. Literacy rate just refers to the number of people who can read and write, and usually you look at 15 or over. Okay. So if we click on this first link, it gives us a pretty good infographic on what literacy is like around the world. So there's a huge illiteracy problem around the world, mostly in those developing countries that we've already talked about, and it also affects mostly women in those countries. So India has the biggest problem with illiteracy. You know, their population is about 1 billion, and 287 million of those people are illiterate, and that's just adults. We're not even talking youth either. And it goes into more youth statistics. Again, females being affected the most. Really, the areas affected by illiteracy are Africa and Southern Asia. It's just harder there, and due to poverty. The top illiterate countries, and there's 13 of them, are all in Africa. So Africa is really struggling with that literacy problem. And then, again, it's just harder for girls because in poorer families, girls are expected to come home and work on the house, and also they're maybe forced into a marriage, unexpected pregnancy, anything like that can keep a girl out of school. Child labor is another reason why children aren't going to school. Illiterate parents, less likely if your parents are illiterate that you're going to be illiterate. Poverty obviously is a big factor, in lacking infrastructure. There's just a lot of these countries, again, are agricultural or rural, so they don't have a lot of the roads and systems in place for them to get to school and have a good education. So it's usually lucky if they are literate because of that infrastructure. So so this is the last thing you need to do. You need to write a 3-sentence summary on what you learned today. Okay, make sure you're doing your Cornell notes. Make sure you're staying organized with that. Make sure that you are asking questions in class the next day, whatever it may be, so you are not confused. But today was really straightforward. A lot of terms being thrown at you. Just know those terms because later on we will talk about those in future lessons. And when we start doing activities, I don't want to have to waste time on that and having to explain it all over again. Okay, so know these terms, and then ask me any questions that you guys may have. But other than that, I hope you enjoyed the lesson, and I will look forward to seeing you guys tomorrow. Have a good day.